And let's look at the middle class. Branko looked at the middle class earlier. He mentioned the middle class, and I think that's an important one to see, because we have economies, countries where we see the middle class eroding. Germany, I think, is one of them, where the middle class is, the social migration goes more to the downside, not to the upside, and it's getting smaller and smaller. You're, on the other hand, on the side of, Southeast Asia, where the middle class is growing. China's middle class is growing, something that we all see and we all, when we try to sell our goods, also take fruition in. How is the middle class, let's say in India, really structured? And do they feel that they're getting a fair share, that they are less on the side of inequality, on the wrong side of inequality, let's put it this way?
Okay. I don't think anybody is ever saying that I'm getting a fair share, because everybody is opting for more. However, I tell you one because you said about India, what the outside world has not understood so far, and being a born Indian living in Europe 21 years, I feel it's very important that I say it today. What has India achieved, or many emerging markets have achieved in the last 20 years, where hunger was a very huge topic? A country like India has achieved that each and every Indian is able to have 2 warm meals a day. For many countries, developed countries, they will laugh when I say it's an achievement. But from Indian perspective, it's a huge achievement.
May I just interrupt you there when it comes to warm meals? In Germany we have the food banks.
Yeah.
The Suppenküchen, which have exploded in the last 10 years. It's unbelievable. Where so many families, they have to go to the food banks to have 1 warm meal a day.
Warm meals. Yeah. So, it is an achievement for a country like India that each and every Indian is allowed to have 2 warm meals a day. I'm not talking about shelter or clothing, and education is far away. Let us come back now to the middle class, because the middle class is not only... there is no general, for emerging markets, there is no general definition of one middle class. There's a huge inequality within the middle class. You say about lower middle class, you say middle class, you say higher middle class. So it is very difficult to individualize a middle class also in that respect. So I think the middle class can afford more than before. So there are many middle classes who are now starting, sending their children to private schools than they were doing it before. There are many middle classes who are having a car, owning car, and there are many double income families which are increasing. Opportunities in the market, job opportunities are increasing, and so there are double income. So opportunities for middle classes are increasing, and I think middle classes automatically having more share. However, I will not say, if you see the total, if you consider the total picture, that anybody can say that in an emerging market, any class will claim to have a fair share. That is something. Nobody will say that I'm having a fair share. Everybody is saying that today I'm working. 100% more than my father was in my age, and I'm earning more, but I'm not earning that more. So am I having a fair share? So fair share is something I don't think anybody... But I personally think that if I see what is happening in Bangladesh also, it's a pretty smaller country, or Vietnam or in Thailand, middle class can really afford more and live a more comfortable life. And there are some markets and there are some products also, like India. If I compare India and Europe, previously, many things, cost of living in many cities were cheaper. However, that is not so. So the difference between a good house on a seashore in India is the same value, is having same value as in Germany, for example. And also, the salaries of CEOs after a particular level, there's hardly any difference. So at one point, the inequality between countries after a particular high level, I will say, of income has reduced. However, in the middle class and also in the lower class, I mean, where people are not affording so much, it has widened a lot. And middle class in some countries like India are going down, and unfortunately, they are increasing the lower class or the poor
quintile
driven, and so that is also happening. So yes, to a certain extent, I will say that middle class is well off than before. However, they always, it's not me, but they always will have a question saying, is it fair?
Well, of course, the media and the transparency of our world economies gets into the picture as well, because whatever you have, you are able now to compare to whatever Donald Trump has somewhere millions of kilometers far, of course. And then you go, oh my God, I work so hard, but still I never get where I really would like to be. Now, in terms of the middle class, Branko, I think we need to explore this one, because when I grew up, the middle class was always like the Mittelstand in Germany, the real core of an economy, which you had to have. You had to have a stable middle class, you had a stable country, you had a stable medium, small-sized business core in the economy, you had a stable economy. Now, A, why is it eroding? Why do we see this trend? And B, what do you think can be done to stop that?
Well, that's actually, first going back to just simply to add to, what Srita just said, clearly in the countries like India and China and as you said, Vietnam and Bangladesh and so on, they have had 20 years of very high growth. Actually, in China, rather 35 years of growth, which is has never happened in history. By the way, I always like to mention that it's never happened in history that so many people had such an increased income over such a long period, consistently over such a period of time. So the middle class has been created. Now the question is, actually, I don't want to go into these details, but that middle class, generally speaking, is of course much poorer than what the Western conception of the middle class is. So it is actually some kind of a global middle class, but it's not the middle class that, for example, for Germany would be the middle class. But it's a huge achievement and a huge, of course, contribution. However, that also has, and I'm not sure that I should use the causality here, but let's suppose it happened at the same time, that there was an erosion in the traditional middle class in the rich world. And for that, we do have effects. Actually, recently, I think there was something on Germany actually published by the German Statistical Office. I just saw that on the. Similarly, whatever you measure, you take the median income and take some ratio there, 25%, 50%, whatever you want to take, and then calculate how many people are in that middle. And practically for every country, every developed country, that number of people who are there in the middle has gone down in the last 30 years. Mm-hmm. So there was this erosion, which we know, erosion of the middle class, and of course it's reflected also in the fact that median wage has been stagnant for 20, 30 years. So this has definitely happened. Now, if this is related to the growth of the middle class in Asia, that's a very complex and political issue. Mm-hmm. It becomes political. Absolutely. So if you really have growth of the middle class in Asia, which takes place on the back of actually richer middle class in Europe and the US, that becomes a political issue with which globalization needs to deal. And if that's the case, I really don't see there are very simple solutions there, because the income gap between these two groups is still large. And if you're an entrepreneur, why should you hire somebody to pay, $10, $20 or $30 per hour in the U.S. when you can hire somebody in Vietnam for $5? So, there is this dynamic which will continue. And I think what was the issue in the rich world is how do you manage, I think to some extent, democracy over the next 20 or 30 years with a diminishing middle class, which is, this is actually something new, because, of course, democracy was doing very well when the middle class was rising. But now with the middle class is going down, I think it will be much more difficult.